30th of July is celebrated as the Day Against Trafficking in Person. And once again, we have here with us the SP of Mokchung, Sri Vishal, IPS, and the additional SP of Mokchung, Sri Imtimaran. And we are very glad to both of them to have taken out this time to share about what is trafficking and make the people aware of its presence. Though we may not feel it, we do have it. So let's hear from both of them and get to know about the trafficking.
Thank you very much for having this opportunity to make our listeners aware. Human trafficking, in simple terms, can be understood as a trade of humans for various illegal purposes. Now, what we generally look at is the action and the practice of any kind of illegal transportation of people from one place to another. Now, this can be for the purpose of either forced labor, or this can be for the purpose of sexual exploitation, for putting them as domestic labor, or for some kind of forcing them to commit some kind of an illegal things or a crime. As well as other extreme forms includes organ harvesting, wherein sometimes people are also trafficked in order to remove organs from their body, since the another related crime, which is illegal trade of human organs, is also a kind of a beneficiary to the human trafficking crime. Now, if we really look at it, if we delve into the different types in detail, first of all, this labor exploitation. Now, under this, if we look around us, sometimes in order to have cheap labor availability, so what will people do? They will try to have the vulnerable groups, especially people who have little awareness or little access to the legal and social protections. They will be lured into some kind of a easy job, or they will be lured through the aspect of payment of some kind of money or some kind of economic support. Now, therein, what may happen actually, these people will be taken to a place where they will be made to work for little or no wages, and they will also be given threats that in case they reveal it to anybody, they'll be beaten up, they'll be killed, something like that. So some kind of a coercion. So what actually this whole thing includes is use of violence or intimidation. Then they'll be put under some kind of accumulated debt, as in for even their basic needs they will be charged a hefty sum of money so that they remain perpetually bonded to them. Then in some cases even their identity papers, for example, it can be their ID cards, or it can be their Aadhaar cards, or it can be their passports when it happens outside our national boundaries. They would be retained by the employers, and then they will be threatened to be reported to the immigration authorities, etc. So now what we also know, the other kind which is very similar to it, is the domestic help or the domestic labor that we see in a lot of houses around us. So therein also, a lot of these people who are actually trafficked, they may or may not be with or without consent. But the point is that these domestic laborers are basically kept by the employers at their home to perform variety of tasks, and then in the process they are being exploited to inhuman working conditions. For example, their movement is restricted, they are not allowed to go out, they are not allowed to basically interact, they are basically put under a lot of duress, as in a lot of threat. And sometimes these domestic help are also subjected to a lot of violence, like frequent beatings which are given to them. And then they are also made to work for a very long number of hours. The thing is that human trafficking does not have any age related pattern. So it can start from as early as a childhood to age old people. So that is a point of concern for us. And then some of the other things like organ harvesting or trafficking the people for removing the part of their body. For example, like kidneys, liver, etc. for trading it illegally in the organ market. So the idea is basically catching hold of these vulnerable people. Now, as per government of India, selling of organs in this form is illegal. Now, coupled with, even if there is some kind of information that it is being done on the consent, or it is being done by providing the person with economic aid, even then also it is illegal. Therefore, human trafficking, to be understood, it does not really matter if the person has been given some kind of an inducement, or the person has been said that they will be taken for some kind of a job, they'll be given some kind of a help, either in the form of, let's say, keeping domestic help and saying that we will help them in order to get education or anything, but actually the purpose would be to keep them as house help, making them work for longer hours. So these all are indicative of the forms of human trafficking. Now, if I may just take you to some of the stages that human trafficking involves. They initially start by actually assessing various communities, various groups of people. They lure those people by assessing their vulnerabilities, whether somebody is economically vulnerable or socially vulnerable, and then they try to bring them into some kind of confidence. So, where we actually think of it as grooming. For the listeners, I must tell that the luring and grooming need not always be in a physical mode. Now, with the advent of even cyber space or availability of the Facebook, social media profiles, etc., so these things are also happening over internet. So it can very well happen to even people with good social or economic backgrounds, because vulnerability does not entail whether there is a particular economic accessibility which reduces our vulnerability, or whether somebody is very comfortably socially placed, then it reduces their vulnerability. So as I said, that this luring and grooming, they can happen in physical human presence, or it can happen over web also, wherein in terms of grooming and the subsequent stage of gaming, what they do, they will entice the person into trusting these kind of human traffickers. So there would be promises made. Promises could be in terms of jobs being offered, promises in terms of physical intimacies, or promises in terms of some kind of gifts being done, or it can sometimes be also promises in terms of marrying, or expressing their interest in the form of having to do with feelings, relationships like love relationships, etc., wherein the person will try to gain the trust and then start the next act, which is the act of bringing in the victim from their place of stay to another place. So now therein the process will start from these kind of persuasive things to a coercion or a manipulation, wherein the trafficker will start to send some kind of a mixed messages with threat as well as with kind of emotional feelings. Then they'll try to make up some kind of a situation, forcing the victim into leaving their place of comfort or leaving their secure premises. And then they'll try to have some kind of threat built in, that if the victim does not comply to their demands, then they'll harm the victim in certain form, either through a physical abuse or through some kind of a mental abuse. And then finally the thing will start for exploitation, where the person will be systematically broken down in terms of their mental capacity to fight as well as their physical capacity. And then will come the last part, wherein the victim will be trapped in such a manner that they think that they do not have an escape. But let me tell you, there is nothing called a situation which cannot be revived, because the actions that are required to fight such a thing will involve proactive approach from the various corners of our society. So in terms of the role of various players, which starts with first the society, they can really do a lot of wonders by being watchful. So how does we can actually know that something of the human trafficking is going on in the neighborhood? So for example, if you meet up with somebody who is reserved, who is seen to be mentally disturbed or physically abused. For example, let's say there are some kids who remain absent from their classes for a long period of time. And if the teacher happen to know that the person is not from the local area, so that should raise a suspicion. Or if some child, or if somebody looks overly tired in classes, somebody is depressed, somebody is distracted, or somebody starts harping about making a lot of money and etc. So these kind of signs should raise an alarm that something suspicious is happening. It can be in terms of you noticing a victim, or it can be in terms of you noticing a trafficker. Then if you may think about somebody having different types of social responses to situations. For example, if you may suddenly ask a person who might be either victim or a trafficker about a vulnerable topic such as human trafficking, etc., or some related thing, then the responses would be very much different from a normal human response, which is towards saying that these kind of activities are bad, etc., etc. So these things should make and raise suspicion among the public. Then secondly, the stakeholder comes in the form of police. Now, in terms of police, I can tell you that government of India has set up a very elaborate systems, which will be explained by our additional SP Shri Imti Merin. Then we have got the third stakeholder, which is in order to secure the victim and in order to provide them with an environment where they can live without fear, wherein the Sakhi one-stop center kind of institution comes in, which supports in not only the survival systems just after the rescue, or even in terms of providing them with the rescue efforts as well as rehabilitation. So there again, an elaborate system is present. What we actually need is the will to reach out in times of distress or whenever we see anybody in distress.
Thank you, sir, for the explanation about trafficking. And of course, I do agree with whatever that you have just said regarding the different forms of exploitation. But we also find that sex trafficking or trafficking for the purpose of prostitution, those are also very prevalent. So what do you say on this?
Thank you so much for bringing in this important type of human trafficking, which is one of the most prevalent form of human trafficking. So in this, as I mentioned, the human traffickers, they do these similar acts wherein they prey upon the vulnerable women of the either younger age or till the little older age in order to groom them either through the form of some kind of a love proposal or a marriage proposal or some kind of a job offers, and then tries to convince them to accompany them to another place. Now, what we have generally seen and known from literature also is that for the younger girls, they try to lure them, simultaneously threaten them into a situation where these young girls are actually in a kind of an abduction or a kind of a kidnapping mode. So these are transported from their place of stay to another region. This can be within the state also, or this can be across the state. So thereby the whole process starts from their home place and it ends to the red light districts, where people are forced to comply to the ill intentions of such kind of people who are known as human traffickers. And they include everybody. They include the person who initially lured them into such kind of a situation where they trust them. Then they include people who are involved in the transportation of these people from place 1 to place B. Then they include even those people, for example, auto, taxis, etc., etc., transportation guys. And definitely involves those people who are actually forcing them to commit such kind of atrocious acts.
Mzungnong metatakza ama yang ya sanuktan additional lesbi mugukchung stream timern tanalia nuchi paya trafficking in person asaba nong ya chimtakar sorkari uzangdam kichiza yanglo jaler ibachi asnuktang rasa ashitsa.
Tamasa human trafficking ta gudang sidir uzangalama nisung shi pelenba da tomalanga ge angadati. Indian Constitution Article 23 Clause 1 ng yamay shalir nisung shi pelenba ji mamalar anong ji nisung shi pelenba ji te mas da asunuki angadatar. Shi pelener ai pelen ta ji balala nong angutse mazang bawa nong Immoral Traffic Prevention Act iba act nong achimdakar ai pelener bangla shi pelener damji kamasam tepuk tak ayuza anabawa nong IPC section 370A nong tapuan anguza tanur shi pelener bangla pa punishment ji ishiba ge kampungwa sije asar asunge tanur dakodang sedir kam 30 takabuk asije dasar anabawa nong mashi ni songa shi pelener bangla shi pelener ta je ishiba ge kam asam then fine tepuk tak alize asar parnok tamje non bailable offense nongangutse asam baba nong Protection of Children from Sexual Offense POCSO Act talir iba act nongja anamaya kar bangla punishment kam terrashi nong tebuk tak ayuze da sarkari rinamaliam pasubaba nong ano Child Labor Act asar bungba nong Juvenile Justice Act da laws tam balala shi blender ai blender bangla legal laws ke panokji alin bangar ayuze asunuki tamasa victim sarabangla tema tamartam ji shinuk da sarabangla nisung mashi ga sijago talisa teacher danur asar teacher dam ta panokji tauksar rongnong atner asra no manani asunok district sianong and the human trafficking unit asar set up salir asar district sianong additional SP ajunga nodal officer sarkari shimalir anongji nisung kardanga iba shi belenba usang tsang anga sarabangla additional SP nang contact number a chungwa lawyer mashi ga nong contact ka sanong nuniki usang tsang ji lamsa dapche asar ajang mas ano contact number ga lir 112 nung information ji aga chara bangla shi blener ai blener wasangdam indangji immediate response ji anguja anongji shunokisa iba ama shi belenba usangsa anga shara bangla police tamdang marndage dang aurage usangje aga chadaksner
Asno yangi mugchung chilano masarongla mugchung district nowa trafficking nowa chimdakar case car wa ralir mali masarongla car traffic azaba wa angazaga lir mali
tanada sinong asunok mokchung district nong trafficking inang baya kija report samali ashigo aliza aguk tamai matogordang masra bangla tawuk sardam jege tjakleni aroge report ji magacheria tamalan November 2011 nong chung nagacher tanatashi jinai nonglogi maba agazza dasar anya loba ponokji kamsaka anya tuya tasunong ponokji logi korean nongor khade ponokji prostitution nong involve sa amshiba usang je angasia ponokji kamsaka dimapur e November 8 nong anya tu saka tanada shibo asunok mosung district nongbo ebama usangje keja report samali.
Of course, with the prevalence of the social media as well as so many platforms where all these messages gets shared, we also have the little notion that trafficking is present in one or the other form. But people are rather reluctant to come up to the open and then report or bring the events to light. So what do you think is the reason behind all this kind of situations?
Yes, as you mentioned, the form of human trafficking is prevalent in and around us sometimes does not give us the notion that actually this is a case of human trafficking. But as I mentioned, that what human trafficking would mean in principle is anybody who is subjected to do any act or who is prevented from their basic freedoms like freedom to move or freedom to speak to their family, friends, or freedom to engage in either intellectual development or a physical development activities. I think those are the signs which we should be very watchful. So the most prevalent thing which we relate human trafficking to is sex trafficking. So Let me tell you that yes, it is one of the most prevalent form of human trafficking. But the other thing which is present in and around us could be in the form of the bonded labor or the domestic labor. Now, there we should be careful that whether it is happening to a child or it is happening to an adult, whether it is being done in coercive conditions. Coercive condition means somebody is being either threatened to continue to work in an inhuman condition or working for a very, very long hours by exploiting either their economic needs or by exploiting their social needs. So, these things we should be really careful about.
Shipulana Tazabaga Kudang Medada Doctor Ipa Nisundagia Kuma Sir Shinukton Tundu Radaba Ba Tijimpulan Lemangjing Mudatsa.
Shi belen ba nong kutang takok sa ajrudir. China no asizao. Delhi no asizao, Mumbai no asizao. Servona Timapur no asizao. Chaka mashiga nunge aziyunga. Ashiba madam district ajak nung and the human trafficking unit additional SP noodle officer sir district ajak nung iba unit chili. Anungji nung iba takok sa nung the nervangla servangla iba si belen ba usangji anga servangla additional SP nang phone asunong contact asunong nuneki kichiagi na aji madam ngudutsa iba tenji kelemi anu women helpline tasir asun nagalen nung number galer 181 mashi phone ga janga iba 181 nungji call asunong tiari malamla ngudutsa asir iba tenji kelemi anu district shanong saki one stop center ler panuk ajanga nunuk tiareje ngudutsa asir tanga no manane shibelen and the human trafficking no ajamdagar barlem no bill ka pasa siba anamdar asir iba bill baji pass servangla and the human trafficking bureau dasir alize asir kudang iba bill ji pass hidier district shano iba bureau ji ajanga shunuksa iba shibelen ba human trafficking no victimize salier panuk tiareji iba ji ajanga mudatsa
Kana Polar Yangi as an additional SP by Ashiyama India Lima non Kuba Chila Noas Zago, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Kuba Noas Yunga, Kudang na victim Gama Nai Angadatir Yangi as an Nagalima non additional SP Katangaz Yunga, Fonser, Natiering Udzazabaji, as Nuki Angadati, as Bayonzer. Coming to the point of one being trafficked, what can that trafficked person actually do?
As I understand it, there are now two situations in the question which you mentioned. One is, if somebody is a victim, then what can they do? So as a victim, one should try to reach the authorities. If they have an access to, let's say, a phone, then they can, as mentioned by additional SP also, that they can either call the women helpline 181, or they can call the police station, or they can call the additional SPs or additional DCPs who are the nodal persons, or they can immediately relay the information to any of their family members that they are facing such kind of difficulties at their place of work, at their place of engagement, at their place of stay. And they should, in case they are not having any kind of communication, then they should make an effort to pass on this message through some or the other way by seeking out for help. Because Government of India is also stressing on identifying ways to prevent anybody falling victim to this kind of crimes. So, as has been already mentioned earlier in this interaction, that not only strengthening of the law, but also creating more and more opportunities for a potential victim to reach out to the authorities. So that brings me to the second part. For example, if or what could be the steps taken by a person to save himself or herself from this situation? So my advice is simple. Whenever you are being offered any kind of an opportunity, I would start with something very familiar to all of us, would be some kind of a job offer. Then you may approach police and you may try to verify the authenticity of the employers who has offered you the job prospect. Then you may find out before going to or moving to the place of your employment the phone numbers of the additional SP or additional DCP, then the local police station phone numbers, then the local Sakhi stop centers, the women helplines, and share the details of the employers with your family, with your friends, especially the details of the human resource managers or the immediate managers that you have, with their complete details, the name. If possible, upon reaching, immediately share their details, their photographs, etc. So that the main point of these traffickers is having the ability to camouflage their identity. So herein, by doing such steps, you will be exposing their identities, and which will help in bringing help to any of the potential victims in case they face such a situation. And for general community, it is an advice. If you see any kind of distressing signs, as I mentioned earlier in the program, please inform the authorities without hesitation. Let there be an investigation into it. If the potential situation is not human trafficking, then it will be investigated and dealt with. If it is human trafficking, then it will provide us with an opportunity to intervene and save a life. And as I say, the strategy is to have a close watch on our neighborhood, because that is where all these activities prevail. And our early action, our awareness, our observations into this will save lives.
July summer, Day Against Trafficking in Person among ban ng damnong asunok magugchong SP Sri Vishal IPS Officer Additional SP magugchong Stream Timandan sensaksam kago Sir sensaksam achanga asunuki parnok kudang ng daktir parnogi ariza asawa asunuki changja shiogo Sir kasama bangnong United Nations achanga Prevent, Suppress, Punish asawa nong achamtakar Human Trafficking je azo kayo marangday anungchi asunok mugukchung no puria yamala nakchitongga your yangi asun police tangmas district administration tangmas saka pangtak kupok iyaker shurnoksa asunuki tongdetsi parnok tin tajongba tongde brad kadatsa sushi lemangkar pusia platform kar tanjaktet nongbo kangapla se azuba dayongzakpa ka matatakcha iba sensaksam shipanger asir yangi asun SP asir additional SP badanga kangapla ba matatakcher